Chetan for one last question before we open up. Let's start looking at the audience questions. Chetan is, Satya talked about empathy, and I think there's a little bit of a thing that the electric world can leverage. It seems like in the electric world, there's a little bit of empathy for the motorized vehicle too. It's kind of bizarre in some sense. People say, oh, this is a good motorized vehicle because it's an electric motorized vehicle. Whereas otherwise it seems like there is acceptance of motorized vehicle and lack of empathy for non-motorized options. And so, I have two questions for you, and you can take them in whatever order. One is to say, is it the responsibility of people working on motorized but sustainable solutions to also be advocates of non-motorized solutions? I mean, I know I'm sort of asking a question that doesn't come naturally to either your business or mine, but it's a fair question to ask, that if the motivation is sustainability, that we must simultaneously favor sustainable motorized, but also non-motorized options equally, and maybe even carry a cost for that. The unit economics of a cycle program are so low that to carry those unit economics within a motorized vehicle program should be fairly simple. That, that it's easy for businesses like ours to say, well, give 100 rupees per month per motorized vehicle that we run simply to support a cycle program in the city. I don't see that as very difficult. So this is one thing I thought you could talk about. The other thing I'll put to you is, you've been working with a lot of governments, just telling them about their cities. This is what your city is like, and this is why, these visualizations of mobility in the city that we've looked at together as well. And this is the fuel infrastructure, and this is the corresponding electric infrastructure you will need to be able to do everything that people do in the city. Which cities are more receptive to hearing others tell them what their city is like and acting on them?
Yeah, I think that your first point is, I'm personally very for that in my personal capacity and as an organization. I think that it's important that we have to look at sustainable mobility solutions, and even if they are non-motorized. And I think over time, there's something between the two, where it's a hybrid area where probably you have cycles that also have small electrification that can be used on both. And so you can cover people who are a little older or would want to have some challenges, can also use that. So I'm for that. And I think that if there are mechanisms in a city that says if people can support that, that'll be good. Because I don't think, as Satya talked about it, it's not this black and white. It's going to be people will still use all forms. And if they're getting to using more sustainable forms of transportation, that would be walking, cycling, and electrics, in general, it would help the entire industry. And we're moving them to those forms. So I'm very much for that on this front. Your second point related to what cities have been looking at this and how they've been working around it. I think that there are two parts to that. One, I think many cities are looking at it, but often there's a gap between that vision and the implementation of this area, right? And we get stuck in this issue. So let's take Bangalore. We're talking about Bangalore here. So let's take this as an example here, right? We've been doing electrics the longest in any city in the country, right? On this area, we're the first city in the country and the first state in the country to roll out an EV policy. Again, very positive on this area. But then, if someone wants to today put up infrastructure, the concessions are still not clear. If someone wants to really register a new three-wheeler, there are still challenges that one faces on this area. If one wants to still get electric connections for this area, the cost of getting electric connections are higher than any other state in the country, right? In terms of transformer costs and stuff like this. If we start to look at, we have lower tariffs of electricity in the city, they're not fully implemented. There is a state policy that says there is a lower tariff, but it doesn't get pushed out to every nook and corner. So the first thing is that I think there's several states and several cities have taken the leadership. The ones that will be successful are going to be the ones that actually stick to the spirit and implement that on this area. We found a very positive thing in Chandigarh. We launched our three-wheelers there. Chandigarh has been very clear. Electrification is very important. So they're only giving permits to only electrics going forward on the three-wheeler side. And they want to promote it. And the city itself can do it. And now, of course, because being a smaller city and a union territory, decision-making is much faster. And that's a city that's already been planned quite well and has that planning thought process, since the 50s on this area. So you see some of that. But then you see pockets of excellence. Delhi's new EV policy was very positive, but unfortunately, with all COVID and stuff, it hasn't been implemented, right? So what I'm seeing is more pieces of the puzzle, but not really a fully integrated area. And I think the first city and state that does it and creates this thought process, everyone will migrate to that. And I think that could then become a model for India. And I think we today have that opportunity in Bangalore. We should be having a conversation is, what do all stakeholders here do to make Bangalore that model city where we already have all the starting points? We have the maximum number of OEMs here. We have all the mobility solution providers here. We have a lot of renewable energy that can come at the outskirts of Bangalore, which means we can power all our transportation on renewable. We have a lot of IT and all of technology here. We have all the pieces of the puzzle. The key is to put this together and make this as a model city and really show that to the country and the world of what can be done.
Okay, let's see if some of us can put something together that would be helpful to the city for that. So I'm going to go to some questions from the audience that are in the Q&A chat windows, and feel free, each of you, if you want to pick up on particular questions as well. I'm happy to start with one from the audience, which essentially says, look, there are and Muralidhar Rao asked this question. He's a sort of a big fan of bus reform in the city. He said, look, there are actually lots, BMTC has 6,000 buses or 7,000 buses, but privately, there are another 45,000 buses in the city. So it seems like it's not that we don't have the vehicles, it's just that the distribution of vehicles is doing things that are not necessarily for the totality of the city, that you have, subsets of the city's economy that are served in ways, and that if we sort of integrated them, you might get more to happen for more and more of this people in the city. Anjali, I'm going to come back to you with this to lead this forward, to say, are we too narrowly imagining what a part of the city, a service or an area is being used for? Is single use itself the problem? There's so many things. I mean, Chetan talked about the shared economy. There's no reason why a school playground or a school building in the evening couldn't be part of a shared society in some way. It seems like everything in our planning world is for single use by single people, single persons.
You were right, and as I said, that the whole premise of the planning in itself is faulty, and it is a single use, primary use by a primary stakeholder, and there is very little shared knowledge around the planning, but that's not how the city functions, and there is a gap over there.
Are you saying that they use it more than singly anyway? That doesn't matter if the planners are.
It does get used. We are not able to capture that within the plan and the policy.
But they're also taking risks doing that in a non-legal way, right? I mean,
yes, of course. Yes, totally. But I think there is just so much immunity that is currently there that it just goes on. The whole system works in a certain way. I would just...
Hold on a second. I don't want to miss that thing. Rajiv, this could be another point that emerges for you, that the master plan must include a fair degree of non-single use, as it were, that essentially you must look actively for things that can be used by more than just the primary stakeholder, for more than just the primary purpose. And this is a concrete step that you could easily take in the master planning process.
I think we are at the cusp of this kind of transformation, and we've already seen the emergence of co-working, for example, similarly shared mobility. And so I think it is entirely possible that we will be looking at shared playgrounds, shared infrastructure, various other kinds. And this is a new way of looking at the world in our city. And that's very, very relevant. We also have to look at new kinds of demands. If people are going to be working from home, if there's a need for social distancing, these are all challenges and opportunities themselves.
Ashwin, to your point on the bus side, I think that it's also important that there is clarity on policy, right? So today, because the government is also in the bus business, which is good, it needs that, the city needs it. How do you try to have private players that can actually use shared mobility at scale, right? You see buses at IT parks, and each company has their own bus. There's no reason why the same bus can't have 5 companies taking it. But there are policy challenges where it doesn't allow you to do it, right? Similarly, can a school bus be multi-use for other applications, right? If all this information was available on a city infrastructure, and we know where transportation needs are and what times they're needed, we can use transportation as idle in an area. But that also means that that route needs permissions to do it. So there needs to be a level of a playing field if you want to really use the transportation, right? If 6,000 buses, as we talked to our government, and 5x of that or 10x of that is not government, then the impact of the other part can be very high on the city. How can we, instead of the government investing more, create and be part of the solution and enable shared transportation to be done at scale and privatize some of it without impacting itself and creating a solution for all? So the shared concept and resource is critical. We can't add more transportation. We just have to use things more efficiently, use road space more efficiently. And that's where I believe there could be a lot of policy things could make this a real enabler.
Rajiv, this is another thing, this idea of a level, I don't want to call it a level playing field, but just, a fair and consistent approach to policy. One could ask, why should school buses be painted yellow if BMTC buses that run for schools don't need to be painted yellow? I mean, it cannot be that yellow is good because it identifies it as a school bus, but when BMTC runs it, it's not necessary for it to be yellow. That it seems like there is constantly in government a regulatory environment that says, these regulations are really private sector regulations. They're not really, when the government, there should be CCTV cameras in all schools, just not in government schools. There should be, one can go on with any number of examples. Collusion between multiple market players is cartelization. But if insurance companies owned by the government do it, that's not cartelization. So there's no, finance ministry even issued an advisory to the insurance companies saying, please cartelize. How do you overcome this thing where the government as a service provider in many sectors of the urban economy is actually exempting itself from regulation, and that's creating wrinkles in the outcomes?
See, when you think about regulation, it's always about regulating private behavior in a very substantial manner and in the public interest. And the assumption is that public entities offering those services will not suffer from any of the perverse incentives that might drive private players, cutting corners for profits or something like that. And but everything needs to be relooked at in totality, because there should be the same rules, as you point out, should be applied to everyone. The example that you give about public buses not being yellow, well, that's because they're only used for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening when they ferry students back and forth. And otherwise,
are you saying that student safety for that 1 hour is not important?
I think that every vehicle should be, conforming to safety norms. So that I think is not at all an issue here. I'm just, we're sort of looking at.
But you're right. You seem to be admitting that color is not one of those safety norms.
No. I don't think. I think color is a signal, but it's not the only one. Every vehicle should be, accorded the same respect, whether it's visibly carrying children or not. It could be an auto rickshaw with, overloaded than otherwise most often. Anyway, the point is the regulatory system needs massive reform. We need to raise these sorts of issues. We need to remove the barriers that would enable more players to actually help move people, move things, move them safely, and in a sustainable manner. So I think that's one of the purposes of the kind of ideation that we're having here. And we need to compile these suggestions, identify why for example, many times these regulatory barriers are there because the public entity may not want private competition. It's already facing challenges. And, and see, if you take the gig economy, for example, the fact that, states have ensured that the only, taxi drivers who are registered as commercial taxi drivers can actually fly is very different from how Uber and Ola equivalents in other parts of the world operate, in terms of the gig economy.
That's going away. That's going away now.
Well, you've been going away quite a bit as well. So anyway, that's not the point. All I'm trying to say is, I'm just saying that regulations need a lot of fixing. There are certain interests which relate to protecting, existing entities and their turf. And we can, reimagine many of these regulations without compromising on sustainability, safety, efficiency, and the ability and the vision of, sharing infrastructure of various kinds with many more people than they're currently shared with.
Well, we have an audience question from Nihal, and Satya, I'm going to toss this at you because Nihal says, well, is there any capacity to do all of these things in the government? Do we need to hire people from the outside and bring them in to do many of these things? And I know you've said to me many times, it's not just that people in government won't do this or that, they can't. And therefore we have to work with that also a little bit.
It's possible, but in the cycling space specifically, most of what needs to be discovered have been discovered. It is not that you can't plan a bicycle track or anything like that. There are some amount of new thinking that is required that can be proposed by people from whoever they are. They should be able to put it out there and say, how do we do that? There's traffic calming measures in different ways. There are local interventions. I think a lot of solutions in cycling. Some of it is definitely capacity. Contractors don't pick up most of the cycle lane tenders because of some cost issues or not having the technology to do pigmentations. They've all come up now. This was an excuse about 4 years ago, but it is not anymore. And expertise is available from outside. It need not necessarily be inside as well. But it's not rocket science in terms of cycling infrastructure. I think the ability to budget for it and make it a priority, which we talked about, is the first thing. The second thing is also to look at how do we then do this outreach and shift the window in a way that people start asking for it, and then the government will definitely enable it. And some of my attempts are always to come back and say, you need to show your intent by picking it up and standing up for it and saying, this is something that I am adopting. I need you to help me put that intervention that is required and help me cycle safely. So I think it cuts two ways. Yes, there is a capacity issue, but it's not all that great. It's not as great as in planning, if you ask me, or in monitoring and management and things like that. That is a far more complex issue than a specific thing for this particular.
A lot of this is also about people's involvement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anjali, you wanted to take the next question, which is from Anusha, and Anusha asks, why doesn't the vision go to the people? Why don't the planners take the vision to the people and to the lawmakers? And why isn't there more interaction around all of these things? I mean, you've been very close observer of this. The master planning process requires all these things, although it's never done. Why is that? Why is it the vision for the city is just thrust on the people as though we take it or leave it?
Primarily because, one, systemically, there is a problem in the way the whole process has been constructed in the legal domain. So the master plan, the act itself does not allow, it's very archaic. It does not allow for participation during the plan making process. Once the plan has been prepared, we are required as planners to put it out in the public domain for definitely not participation, but comments and suggestions. So therefore, while the plan is being prepared, there is no participation, leave alone from the general public, but also from several other departments which are part and parcel of running the city. So to begin with, there is an issue with the act which defines how the plan has to be prepared. And then from that, there are several other issues that emerge from that. I'm not too sure if we have the time to answer that, but it's essentially a lot of the problem lies in the way the act has been framed. It's a very old act. With all the amendments, it still is not in line with the current requirements in current context.
Yeah, people like Ravi, who sort of were on this restructuring committee, could actually speak to this a little bit more. We're coming towards the end of the time that was available for this program. So I'm going to take one last question from Janvi and read that out to you. And I'm going to actually start with Chetan, because he's an old Bangalore boy like me. And say, look, the city isn't really what it used to be. Places you cycle from home to school, etc., they are now increasingly smaller parts of the city. More people live outside in the metropolitan area, but our imagination of the city is still, it's whatever. It's Kalasipalayam and Coxtown. Is there a problem just being able to see, as including Dasarahalli and I don't know, Kengeri and all of these places?
So, Ashwin, I unfortunately didn't get half of your question here. I did get the
I'm saying the city, let me repeat that quickly. The city has grown a lot. It's not the city where you cycle to the school. Is that part of the problem, that there isn't a clear understanding of how much bigger the city is and how much it has changed?
Yeah, I think that's a very...
Even people like us who know the city well.
Yeah, I do think you're very right. We have a perception of the earlier city of Bangalore being much smaller, and the way it has grown today, it doesn't have all of those pieces of the puzzle coming together in terms of the connectivity, and it's grown in ways that have make these things much more difficult. So it needs to be almost seen as each local area of what kind of solutions you can have and how does that link to the larger part of it. Because I think earlier, a lot of your world was, 5 to 6 kilometers from where you were. You didn't go beyond that. You could get everything there. Today, that world is probably 20, 30 kilometers, or sometimes even more, which means that all of a sudden, everything we understand about transportation, mobility, planning has completely changed. And that is not coming into our perspective, or maybe a lot of the policymakers' perspective of the quantum of which has grown. And I do believe it's an important part. That it is important thing to recognize that this is a very different, more of a large metropolitan than it is, the garden city of the country.
So Rajiv, I'm going to toss this back to you, both to answer, take one thing on record and then close the program as you see appropriate. BDA's master plan identifies what they call planning districts in the city. At the end of the master plan, there's a set of planning districts that are identified. And the understanding in law is that for each of those planning districts, there should be a town planning scheme that BDA is supposed to develop to actually fulfill the mandate and vision of the master plan. But after its color-coded graffiti publication of the master plan, BDA has never, in my knowledge, BDA or any other planning agency has never actually gone and made
Yeah, let me jump in, Ashwin. Basically, these are entities.
I remember I was chief guest at the 50th anniversary of the town plan request. Make a town planning scheme anywhere in the state. Sorry, go on, Rajiv.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you get that?
I'll try my best. Anyway, the issue is this. Many of these organizations were set up with different mandates and different visions originally, and they have yet to come to terms with the kinds of changes that the city is going through and the need. And what I think enlightened political leadership, enlightened engagement by citizenry will be able to bring about the kind of change that we all think we need. And again, as you point out, the city itself needs so much more coordination between these entities, because there is a different there's a different wide field, there's a different Baswangudi where I live. There's so many different ways of imagining the city, but the entities that are managing the city and are responsible for coordination, planning, execution, they are not yet on the same page. And there's a lot of work that we have to do in that direction. Shall I take it to a conclusion at this point?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I wanted to thank each and every one of you, the audience who have come together and asked so many questions, out of which we were able to answer only a handful. It's been a very engaging set of questions out there as well that shows you how passionate our citizens are about how the city is working or not working and how to make it work in different and more sustainable ways in the future. There's so many issues that we were able to cover thanks to Ashwin Mahesh, who has done so much both with government and in the private sector and in sort of the non-profit sector in terms of taking these ideas of sustainable mobility forward. Chetan Maini, our pioneer in the electric car space, who's doing so much more, again, not just in Bengaluru, but in the country and across in other inspiring other cities elsewhere in the world. Anjali Mohan, who has been in the thick of things with the planning process and seen the challenges, and I'm sure will tell me offline how to help improve processes going forward. And Satya Shankaran, with whom I have shared bicycle rides, and hope to see the opportunities to ride together across the city in safe lanes. There's so many other issues that we were hoping to also cover, but time's been short. Ashwin and Satya have been working on newer ways of ensuring bicycle lanes, for example, around lakes, of which Bengaluru has many. We wanted to talk about mobility for people who are pedestrians, how difficult it is to walk on the sidewalk, on the footpath, and or to cross the street. Mobility challenges faced by the elderly, by the people who are differently able. There's so many issues as we think about sustainable transport. Luckily, there are, even in the shared economy, more movements towards electric and hybrid and less environmentally impactful vehicles. There are two-wheelers and others. We had a session with Bounce the last time, and they and other companies are out there trying to bring in electric vehicles for last mile connectivity in the shared economy. There's just so much that we still have to do and discuss and implement in the years ahead. So thank you so much, every one of you. Thank you, Bangalore International Centre. Thank you, Purpose and Oneindia, for your support in making this webinar series so insightful and enriching. And I look forward to many more interactions like this in the future. Thank you, everybody, including people who've helped us technically with the presentation today. Good evening.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.